Thank you all for coming. I'm Diane Katz, Executive Director of ASLA New York. As you know, we have events all through the year, and we have this one twice a year, so I'm glad you're all here. I'm glad we keep the topics interesting. Another big event coming up is our President's Dinner. A lot of you have probably heard from me. Individual tickets are on sale, sponsorships are available. The President's Dinner really keeps us going all year round. It's our only fundraiser. If you're able to come, we'd love to see you there. Any interest or any questions, please contact me. As I said, individual tickets are on sale on our website. And I'm going to turn it over to Al Key from Deep Root.
Cool. Are you going to talk about ASLA CEUs?
Oh, for the CEUs. If you haven't already, please sign in on the CEU sheet at the front desk. And I will be sending an evaluation on Monday. Once you complete the evaluation, I will record your CEUs. Any questions? And this is Al Key from Deep Root, our sponsor.
Well, thanks, Diane. I was doing a little bit of math the other day, and I realized that I've been doing this for 10 years now. So 2 times a year, it's my 20th for CEUs and a beer. That's, I think, way too much. Maybe we should time to get some fresher blood in there. But I will say that we have to thank Country Casual Teak as a sponsor as well. And, you know, I work for Deep Root. It's this thing called the Silva Cell. I believe this is an installation you guys all know. So this is me here. So yes, and then we're going to move forward. I will say that we are not going to, here if I can get this right. There we go. We are not going to read everybody's bios. These are very accomplished professionals that you're about to hear today, and their bios are online. I will say that I assure you they all went to really good colleges. So with that, I give you Darlene Montgomery of Snowetta.
Thanks, Al. Let's see. Start with the opening slide. It's a bit of a dad joke, but welcome to Bio, I Feel Ya. There was this heightened kind of, interest in biophilic design, as you all know. During the pandemic, it seemed to ramp up at the same pace. And I felt like there was something weird that happened with the word biophilic, that people were coming to us, clients were coming to us and trying to get us to design biophilic designs with putting plants into projects, even at an urban design scale. And I felt like there was something that people were glomming onto, was the feel part of it. So it wasn't just that they wanted trees around them, but they wanted kind of low-level greenery that you could feel, that you could touch. And it was very different from audiophiles or bibliophiles or Anglophiles. There was like a feeling part of it, which I thought was really weird. But I was also thinking about it last week when my friend and colleague Matt McMahon messaged me and said that the Hargrave's office in Cambridge was for sale. And we were secretly hoping that they would have this huge blowout party and invite everyone who's ever worked at the office. But I was thinking about my time there and all the things that I learned about grading and about, the power of landforms and spatial modulation. And I think the most salient thing that I took away was their no office plant rule, which was enforced there. They explained to me by a landscape architect, Rachel Loeffler, who said that the idea was that you couldn't have plants anywhere in the office, not even on your desktop, because plants were decoration, or plants weren't decoration, sorry, and we shouldn't treat them like that. So plants belong outside, they're not supposed to be inside. And I carried that with me through my career as I went out into the world designing. And so Rachel Loeffler explained this to me. She had this Soul jade plant on her desk, and she said it was small enough that she could put it away if George or Mary Margaret came into the office and hide it. And she wasn't doing it as an act of revolt or anything like that. She was a mild-mannered, lovely woman. But I think she really did it because it made her feel good, having this plant on her desktop, even knowing that we had this office policy. And so it made me think about the kind of relationship of plants inside, even owning this small jade plant, and how it may connect her to what she's doing on a larger scale, or how it may make her feel better about, our guilt for climate change and ozones and higher temperatures and, flooding sea levels. So fast forward many years later, I started to work on the Ford Research and Engineering campus with Nick Koster, who invited me here today. And partway through the design, after we got to SD, we got a request from the client side, an interior designer, who wanted us to put plants in the building, a building we'd kind of started to wrap our arms around in terms of what it was and how it was working. And so I gave a presentation to our internal team, the architects, kind of urging them and challenging us to think about a different way of approaching landscape inside a building, and not just dripping everything with plants. And what I was really afraid of was that this kind of beautiful space, a series of beautiful spaces and experiences that we designed were going to start looking like those renderings that we all see that look like cooked spinach, like just gets glommed on to every kind of surface. And so I'm going to show you some of that presentation that I gave to the internal team, but I wanted first just give you a context for the project so it makes a little more sense. So this is our Ford Engineering and Research Hub, where they design cars in Dearborn, Michigan. And the larger campus is 300 acres. Snøhetta started working on it in 2016 and did a large-scale master plan for it. And this is the first phase of it. It's the hub. The campus right now is a series of 1960s buildings surrounded by uninterrupted asphalt parking. And so part of the goal for this plan was to make the outside perimeter much more porous to the surrounding community, and also consolidate workers and designers in one building, but make it fun to come to work, make people want to come here to work, and cross-pollinate the experience so that we in Ford believe that better ideas were going to come about with people bumping into each other casually and sharing ideas. So part of the project was to reinstate and reintroduce these native Michigan landscapes here. And this is a planting plan. In the parking areas that you see were temporary. They're the sites of future buildings. And so we had a lot of fun thinking about how to creatively do parking areas in a place that was really interested in the future of mobility. And so we made these non-orthogonal parking lots and had a lot of fun. Sorry. It's not really advancing, sorry. Do it here. There we go. And at Snøhetta, we're really interested in how buildings meet the land. So we did a number of studies of how these landscapes feel, how it feels when you're right next to the building. The building itself is about 2.25 million square feet, so it's huge. It's only 5 stories. And we wanted this to be inviting to the community, inviting to people who go there. So Yiwa on our team did these, heartbreakingly beautiful sketches of what this would feel like in different seasons. And then there was also an ecological component. We weren't just restoring the landscapes that were once there. We developed this, huge ecological gesture at the side of the building that takes up all of the rainwater from the roof and directs it down through runnels and valleys and dry seams and wet prairies and dry prairies, and filters it out and makes this, very grand ecological gesture that became the sign of the building. And we like the connection between the engineered landscape and the engineering that was happening inside. And then, as well as outside the building, we created all these perforations in the building itself so that workplaces were really infused with light and life. And we designed these 6 landscapes to be almost like lenses to native Michigan landscapes. So imagining that you just focused in on one aspect of a Michigan landscape. And some of these, the scale again is deceptive. Some of these larger courtyards are the size of Bryant Park. And then some of them are occupiable, some of them have spaces to review cars in, and some are just there to look at. And Jeshwan on our team did this very simple but beautiful diagram of what the underlying idea behind these courtyards were, that they were natural, but they were also artful, and that you could look at them as this very poignant point in time. And so one of the courtyards was inspired by the Great Lakes shoreline, but we also combined each of them with not only a piece of Michigan native landscape, but also a piece of Ford's rich engineering history. So the Great Lakes shoreline was combined with the geometry of the testing track that Ford has across the street from it. We like the kind of beautiful curves of it. This is an early sketch of how that started to work. And then we placed pavilions as meeting rooms in this space. And then a further development, you can see it works on many levels, but we maintain these kind of car driving geometries with these native larches and service berries and this kind of artful interpretation of a Great Lakes shoreline. And then a view of it, you can see that pavilion over to the left, and then Jeshwan even came up with these lights that look like little campfires along the edges. Then another courtyard was designed with a oak savanna theme, and paired up with the beautiful shiny paint colors in Ford's history, all of the kind of metallics and all of the history of greens, as well as tire tracks. And then another one, this was one of my favorites, that was a tiny one that didn't get a lot of light into it, and this was designed based on ferns that don't need a lot of light, combined with this razzle-dazzle pattern, which Ford applies as a screen to cars that they're testing on the road so that their competitors can't understand the nuances of the design. And so it was at this point that we were asked to start to look at putting philodendrons and tropicals into these workspaces. And again, it was at the height of the pandemic, and people did a lot of research about how being around plants will make you want to go back to the office, would make you feel better, would make you feel healthy, would really psychically change your life. And we wanted to take a pause there instead of doing the knee-jerk reaction and just doing what a client asks us to do, but try to unpack a little bit what makes a landscape or what makes you feel like you're in a landscape inside, and imbue this whole project with a sense of place and history like the rest of the spaces we've designed. And so this is part of the presentation I gave to our internal team. So it was really like Landscape 101 for them, saying, you know, what is a landscape? A landscape is about, you know, time, it's about place, and it tries to answer the question, what is your relationship to the land you possess? And we wanted to use that as a starting point to how we move forward with these spaces. And then we talked a little bit about the history of indoor landscapes, about conservatories and winter gardens. And, you know, I shared that, you know, in literature and novels, it's always like a red flag if something takes place in a winter garden. You know, if someone gets engaged there or there's like a deal hatched, it's, you know that it's always like gonna go south. And then try to relate it to, you know, this kind of millennial trend and try and think of it like this trend, and we didn't want this to be a trendy space that we were designing. And this, on the right, this was a bit of a low blow since most people on the team identified as a millennial. However, they're still my friends. And then I tried to apply to their architecture education and their, you know, the lack of ornamentation, that plants inside are ornamentation, that we shouldn't, you know, just, you know, sprinkle plants around these workspaces because we're just told to. And, you know, the stern look of Adolf Loos was there as a reminder of this. And at the same time, we became really interested in the Ford logo. I think first because it was the only logo we could think of that wasn't a symbol. And we did a little research and asked the client group, and they have obviously this incredible archive. And it came from Henry Ford's own signature. And so we took this idea of calligraphy and the way that, you know, the pen moves around the page, the way kind of ink globs on in certain places where you slow down and stretches out as you move faster. And we thought that this was a nice way of thinking about paths and circulation through the project. So that, and it also had this nice relationship to design, like actually drawing and designing cars inside the place. And, you know, the kind of the curves of the test track. And so we wanted to kind of think about that as a way of introducing kind of social spaces. And it tended to work on many scales. It worked on the courtyard scale. It worked on the kind of around the building landscape scale, as well as this kind of site-wide scale. And then we looked at how this worked in the building itself, and thinking about these interior landscapes, working with, you know, these sight lines and color and light. And we often at Snøhetta think about kind of space like a string of pearls, that you're walking from one space to another, but there should always be something in the distance that you identify with that's going to pull you to this next spot. And so then this wonderful interior architect joined the team, and so I sequestered her right away in my, you know, fight against the philodendrons, and said, how can we create, you know, how would you create spaces inside that are landscape spaces, that aren't just green plants? And so she came up with a number of kind of variables that you could alter. The first one being color, you know, colors of the earth and colors of leaves. And she had this beautiful idea of matching the color inside with the color of a tree, maybe just for like a week of a year, that they would align. And then we talked about datums, you know, how these subtle architectural moves can make you feel like you're at a seashore, make you feel like you're underground in a cave, or make you feel like you're looking at the base of trees. And then we talked about ceilings and how they can not just emit light, but how they can reflect light and feel like they're ephemeral, and feel like they're part of a natural process, and how they can differ over the time, that you visit them. And then finally, we also talked about floors, and not just kind of natural materials that we use inside of spaces and how they sound and how they feel to walk on, but how they rise up and start to be sculptural and invite you into these spaces, how they make you behave in a way that's more social. And so then the final slide I'll leave you with, and the final slide I left the team with, were these two iconic interior spaces that were designed at Snøhetta. The left are the SF MoMA restrooms that use color in this immersive way, and that really kind of hit you on an emotional level when you enter there, as this feeling like it's artful, but it's natural, and it feels like an interior landscape. A lot of people like to take their photos here. It feels like you're in a drop of paint, so it has this nice relationship to SF MoMA. And then the one on the right is the Wild Reindeer Pavilion that sits on the top of the mountain Snøhetta, after which the company is named. And it's not just that, it's made out of wood and it has this beautiful glass wall that looks out onto this Norwegian landscape, but it embodies kind of time. It feels like it's been sculpted by time and it's part of time. So this isn't about how to create humidity or care for plants inside, but just to kind of provoke people to think about landscape in a different way and think about how all of these elements can combine to make you feel that there's the memory and energy and ephemerality of a landscape when you enter a room. Thank you.
Darlene, I think we have time for a few questions.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, she has another 20 minutes to go. So.
Oh, sorry, that's fast, sorry.
So any questions for
Yep.
Darlene? All right, well, we're ahead of schedule then.
Okay.
All right. And I guess with that, Andrew Engel, you're up. Oops, wrong way. Yeah, there you go. Thanks. There he is. Do it again. Sorry, Andrew.
No worries. So, hello everybody, thank you. It is a particular honor to be able to represent my field, which is horticultural science, to all of you in the landscape architecture profession. I'm particularly happy that this session today is on indoor landscaping. As a horticulturist, I feel like it really is one of the most misunderstood categories of ornamental horticulture. I've been a horticulturist for 15 years. Much of the time, I've been intrigued by indoor horticulture because of the challenge it represents. I could argue very easily that in many cases, it is much more challenging than outdoor horticulture, outdoor ornamental horticulture. The other reason I really love it is I think there's a ton of opportunity. See what they're doing in Singapore. Actually, that picture from the left is there. There's just some wild projects happening. The spheres, the Amazon spheres in Seattle, just really amazing stuff. And I also feel that it's extremely undervalued. That quote up there is from the EPA, believe it or not. The European Commission has a similar quote, really staggering, anywhere from 78 to 90% of the time. Some of these places estimate that we spend inside. So when we talk about, the value of the indoor landscape, I mean, that kind of really says it, to me at least. Before we dive into some case studies, just get on the same page with a couple things. And this is in regards to my presentation and how I'll be speaking about it. One, what is indoor landscaping? What is it not? It isn't just decorations. It isn't just houseplants. To me, it's a modern form of hortus conclusus, which is a walled garden. It's our modern interpretation of that. I feel that this is a critical distinguishment because, and it is not what you see on the right. That really bugs me out. In the realm of public discourse, houseplants are often considered the same. Thanks to our last presenter, we also covered a little bit of that as decoration. But, it's amazing. I have a handout I put in the front there. It's homage to some books that were written in the 70s and 80s when this industry, the indoor landscape industry, was just starting off. Those lists are reminiscent from books that were actually written by architects and horticultural scientists, whereas today there is nothing in print about indoor landscaping. Everything is about houseplants, everything is on trend. If anybody is interested in some resources, I have some, and I'm happy to direct you guys to books written by, colleagues of yours in the architecture field, really addressing this when it was starting off in the 70s. So what is an indoor landscaping firm? It is not a florist shop. It is not an interior designer. It is not me. A good indoor landscape firm will have design, build, and maintain capabilities and be able to perform whatever them you require. So it's not just somebody who comes and waters the plants, and somebody like me is just a component of a capable firm. What does an indoor horticulturalist do? What do I do? Plant pathology, entomology, education, research, testing. My research is how far can I push a plant before it expires versus my colleagues in the botanic gardens who really their data set's on the exact opposite end. They're conserving wonderful collections and building the environments for them. But relevant to all of you, I serve as a consultant. So I've worked with some of the firms here, but more often than not, I'm brought in by clients after something goes wrong, and I'd love for that to be the other way around. Just because it's a bummer. I mean, I love indoor horticulture, if you can't tell, but I want the field to be successful and for people to really like it. One other note here, I'm going to be referring to indoors in general as a reference to spaces at the intersection of people and plants. So that's not a botanic garden. These are environments that are mostly built for people where plants kind of coexist, because that's just the way it most often is. And that doesn't capture all of indoor landscaping, but that's for our purposes here today. That is what I will be talking about. So as I was thinking about what I could bring, what kind of value I could bring to you guys, I was thinking about conversations I've had with landscape architects and also jobs that we've been consulted on over the years, and really where things maybe went wrong or where there was a cost, where plants weren't used successfully, costs overran, or there were personal costs to reputations, et cetera, or the clients, their goals weren't met. And really, almost all of it spawns from the kind of grouping in of indoor landscapes with outdoor. And I get it, it's easy to do because indoor is such a niche field that it's just, it's easy. I would say every bid that I've ever seen, not everyone, but a lot from landscape architects or architects in general, they have specs in them that relate to, outdoors. So I'm installing, wind girders or something indoors where there is no wind, just because it's on the spec. So so I think when we delve into it, I have four main considerations here that I feel could have been avoided in the planning stage. And these four considerations, which are also covered on the handout, are sourcing, environment, maintenance, and renewal. And so we're going to cover those in our case studies. So sourcing, there's a perception that indoor plants are as readily available as outdoor plants. Not true. We're going to look at the Winter Garden in New York, 16 Washingtonia palms. There's been palms here. It's been a staple of downtown Brookfield Place since the late 80s. They're Washingtonia robustas. They are known as sky dusters in the West. You may recognize these as along the sides of, Hollywood and LA. Same plant. They're native to Baja California Peninsula, small part of the Sonoran Desert, but they are a staple there. Now, I have two pictures juxtaposed against each other. It's a little hard to tell. The one on the left is from the early 90s before we were consulted. The one on the right is more recent. It's just to show kind of that they're a little bit stronger today. But what's mostly important in this picture is that there are two trees missing on the left. And actually there were 3 trees that were missing before the New York Botanic Garden and the client reached out to our firm to help them determine a plan for moving forward. So what do you do when you need some new palms? Well, it's not quite that simple. We're actually going through it right now because there is a renewal process every so often for horticultural reasons, but it's a 2-year journey. Oh no, there's supposed to be an alligator to the left. I don't know where it went. It's escaped somewhere. It's really strange. Anyway, so it's a 2-year journey. The first step is you have to find out where these palms are growing, okay? So looking at Arizona, looking at California, you're looking at Florida. In this case, these are pictures of Florida from this year. A lot of this is grown more in agricultural. A lot of this is grown on real estate that a group of lawyers or somebody has that they're just waiting to develop at some point to get the palms that, and a lot of it's insider knowledge. A lot of these fields don't even have addresses. So sourcing is really a specialty, and it's really more like an agricultural operation. So we find fields, and then we have to hunt through the fields, and then we're looking for 16 perfect palms, on 100-degree days with fire ants and spiders and snakes and all of that good stuff. I'm an indoor horticulturist. I'm used to a little, So that shows a little how they specialized. Here, it's a little bit, we're measuring some trees to the left. Again, we're trying to find 16, and some backup perfect palms. So these palms have beards on them for the most of their juvenile life. They're about 15 years old. So we're finding a field with, 1,000 or so 15-year-old-ish, 35, 40-foot Washingtonias. Then we're measuring the heights. We're standing, on every angle, trying to say, is this thing straight or not? Because, the people growing these are just, they're used to like Universal Studios or somebody coming. Take 50 of them, whatever, put them on the side of the road. So for us, it's kind of like, these people are kind of a pain. But, this is what we do. So finding matching trees. Then, of course, once you find 20 or so that you really like, it's about well, being really, really careful because you just searched through about 1,000. There's a lot of sweat in there. So you dig them up. This is where, horticultural science on my end and knowing tropicals is important because they have, they're herbaceous, they have, fibrous root systems, so they can be dug up like that. Then you pack them up, and then, well, where the heck do you bring them? You have to find someone sort of crazy enough or, conciliatory enough that has space, that's willing to take these as a liability, because remember, they're gonna go through, they are getting ready to be packed up, they're gonna go through 2 hurricane seasons in Florida. It's about a 2-year process for acclimation and such, which I'll talk about in a minute, but we're potting them up. Now, you wouldn't do this if you were planting them outside, but we need them to stand straight up. We need them to tie in, because we're going to, we're in the process now of acclimating them for indoors. So that requires, there they are potted up, which is kind of funky, giant tree and kind of a little pot. And they're actually being tied up there partially for hurricane protection. But here, now you have to build a shade house around them. So picture at the bottom right was one of the first sets of palms that was brought in. It was the largest shade house at the time in Arizona. One of the sets came from out there. This is the shade house as it stands today for the set that's going to go on in 2024. And so there's a lot involved in there. You have to find a grower who has the space. They're willing to give you that space for 2 years. They're able to take the liability of, building the shade house. One hurricane could fly through and, basically destroy the houses. So it really is a pretty major project. Now, the reason that and then I'm down there every month or so taking, everything from tissue cultures to just monitoring everything, because these will have to live 10 or 11 years now, and somehow manage to go through, coming from beautiful Florida to somewhere inside of New York, which is a heck of a transition. So we harden them, and this is true for every indoor plant that we want to use. They have a better chance of survival if you put them in a shade house for at least 6, sometimes 12 months, depends on the type of plant. It changes the leaf structure, it changes the morphology of the leaves. Actually, they become broader and thinner and more able to receive, the chloroplasts are more able to receive light. There's other reasons too, but generally indoors, people expect the plants to look good from day one, and the transition is tough enough, so anything we can do to help. So really there's a lot to be cautious of when you're sourcing. It's really specialized. Most of the plants for Europe and the Northeast and most of the United States really do come from Florida. Some things are grown in California. We source some from Canada, some from Hawaii, but most is from Florida because of the real estate, but that's being threatened because real estate prices and development is there. Some people just say the heck with it. I don't want to deal with another hurricane or sell to become a polo ground or whatever. Large shade houses, sometimes you have to build them for your project. It takes time to source what you want, and sourcing is a major job of a good interior landscape firm. They will know how to do that. Second perception, the screen here is, so here's installation there of some of those palms and then sort of how they look today. Second factor here is environment. Perception that will work outdoors will work indoors. The plants will sort of function the same as they do outdoors in most indoor environments. Remember, indoor environments for us meaning, environments that are really built for people. To understand environment, and this is also on the checklist, there is a framework developed by the late Dr. Ronald Wood called PLEMA. I've added an S to that framework, and really this exists because the indoor environment is so different and there are so many different variables that we do need a framework to review when we're starting an indoor project with plants. Remember, we don't have sun. Remember, we don't have rain. As we'll see later, lifespan of certain plants is different. There's a whole slew of factors here. Select the right plants that are appropriate for regular human interaction. They won't get kind of gnarled up or won't, bite a human with being sharp, some yuccas or something. Light quality, intensity, and length need to be adequate for plants to thrive and not just survive. You don't want your plant just slowly dying, as we see with most snake plants inside. You want to plan early on how you're going to bring water and nutrients, and importantly, you want to have a way for water to drain out of your landscape. You don't use soil inside, and you want to use a soilless medium. Outside temperature, indoor heating, cooling, humidity, airflow. A lot of airflow around the plants can make them transpire quicker, make them need more water than you expect. And then system, meaning your plant house, your type of green wall system, or your type of container. Not everything that works outdoor will work inside. So let's look at a couple case studies here. The Urban Garden Room at One Bryant Park, one of my favorite places in New York. It's gorgeous. You have a mix of Hedera algerianensis, which is Algerian ivy, and you have some Ficus repens or pumila. See that down in the south outdoors. Beautiful plant. So we have two types of plants in there. Now what you may not know is it was designed with quite a few more plants than two. And in fact, there were lichens and mosses and ferns. And the original inspiration being the fern canyons of Northern California. So today, there are no ferns. Original planting is to the left, best picture I could find. The planting again today is to the right, so it looks quite different. So what kind of happened here is that an indoor horticulturalist wasn't necessarily brought on from the beginning. My team, we were brought in after it was already sort of planned and planting was begun. And we were brought in because, well, they're going to need someone to take care of this. So what happened was that framework I discussed before, the Plimas framework, wasn't necessarily considered in every aspect. So the plant palette wasn't appropriate for the amount of light, particularly the first year when there was some scaffolding. The water wasn't particularly set up correctly from the get-go. Some of the plant species weren't sustainable for indoors. So if you don't follow the framework, there are some costs that are involved. There's about 45,000 plants in there. More than 100% of them were changed out the first year. So that is a cost to the client. My firm now redesigned it with what will work, but now you have an indoor landscaping firm taking over, a vision, which is kind of a loss, potentially. But there's a cost to, expectations. There's a cost to redo, remove, or redesign the space. You definitely want to consider that framework and bring indoor horticulturalists involved. Another garden, similarly, this is in a pharmaceutical company in New Jersey. The original planting had two different types of plants. And maybe this may seem minor, but probably not to this audience because you understand the nuances of your own designs and such. So this is what it is today to the right. So it's a more of a workhorse plant, Epipremnum aureum or pothos, which is what would survive actually in the condition after the design was implemented. So yeah, it looks great to me, but it wasn't necessarily what was intended. Another great one that I was consulted on, a river birch inside. Well, no, you can't do that in a normal indoor environment. There's an article in the Times the other day that was about I had a maple tree inside and it was making me kind of nervous. But essentially, I came in, and I mean, this is just one example. No, some trees biologically need chilling. I'm not saying you can't do them inside, but not in an environment that you're going to live and work in and play in. So we gave them a beautiful Ficus retusa, it might be a nitida, and everybody's happy. Another case study on this Plimas framework. Looks very Star Wars, this lobby downtown on Barclay Street. The original, and this is about understanding how plants will do inside versus outside, and really knowing from the planning stage, from the rendering stage, what you're going to pass on to your client to meet their expectations for the long term. The original design and rendering is to the bottom left. Day one install to the top left, you see it mimics it pretty well. Then you already have maybe the first month, you see the color starts to fade in the plants, which is very apparent in the design and the rendering. So maybe that's minor, but it's knowing how plants function inside, knowing how they function in the light, understanding the spectrum that they have. Now, when I was called to consult, as is almost always the case, which bums me out, is when something has gone wrong, and this is how it was when I came in to take a look at it for them. They weren't happy. I inspected a little bit more, and there was some structural issues. Some of it was based on the system, and this is a very big investment for this company. So they could have easily just said, the heck with it, I'm going to get rid of everything, which is sometimes the case, especially, so there's some structural issues. I believe, there might have been some issues with the system, but more than that, the system type doesn't really work indoors, okay? This type of green wall system is grown in horizontally. It's all the plants are grown in before it goes up. It presupposes that the plants are going to do wonderfully. The roots are going to connect everything together, keep it stable. But that's not really the reality most of the time indoors. So really what happens is the minute you try to refresh or renew a plant, you start to destabilize the wall. So you start to have soil coming out. You change the soil or the medium mixture, and then you have water patterns that start to change. So the client actually had to sweep and clean water constantly from the front of the wall. And not only that, and this may have worked outside, but the entire wall only had one drain that you see there. So a lot of mud, some mosquitoes, some stuff you wouldn't necessarily want inside. But all that disturbance of pulling plants in and out, in that type of system, it doesn't really work. So when we came in, knowing what we know, we redid the wall. We proposed a system to them that is more tried and true. It's always good to ask the people that take care of these things in the long run which system they want to work with. And so this system is more amenable to indoor spaces, easier to replace things. This is the rendering we did based on my knowledge of plants. And then this is it a couple years later. You can see it's pretty true to the form, even though that little map there still has the old plants, but nobody seems to notice. But that's okay. So that is environment. Maintenance. Perception that indoor landscapes require minimal maintenance. This one really bums me out because it's not true. So there's two areas. Like outdoors, let's just say you're planting a tree. Maybe you want to check on it yearly. Certainly sometimes it takes some care, but indoors, it really takes a high level of detail because things aren't necessarily perfect for the plants. So accessibility of maintenance of the landscape and the capability of the firm is what we're going to be looking at. So, wonderful rendering there to the left, someone's vision. Now, you can't really see, but the picture at the top is an exit door with a spinning, rotating door. It's about 2 feet up. That small bit of landscape there requires us to, for 3 hours to maintain. We have to have a tie-off with the lift. And so is that cost really worth it for the client? Was that design really make sense? Did they really think about the maintenance portion? Probably not, and that cost gets pushed onto the client. The rendering that you see to the left, they had some pretty sharp, tall, towers there, and so that, again, would have required a lot of maintenance. The client didn't even want to entertain it because to do it safely would be a lot more than maybe what it's worth. Same building, now you have the rendering to the right, and you have this pool area. There's a couple plants you see at the top left. Now, what's amazing is that those windows up there do not open. So if you want to maintain these plants, you need to close off the pool, build a scaffold, bring a lift. I mean, why? You know, like, you don't want us doing that. We don't necessarily, I mean, sure, it would be, I'm sure, some good money, but, you know, it's really just kind of, you know, not thinking about maintenance and accessibility and what those costs will be to the client. Another case study here, the Sky Atrium. This is how it looked maybe about a year ago or so. You know, really, when I got asked to consult on it, this is where we were. An outdoor firm had installed it. The client, this is a high-end building. They had not sold half of their units. Everybody was freaking out. They brought in some arborists. They weren't able to, treat trees inside due to New York City regulations. Somehow they found us, found me. I came in, I brought out my scope, I did my tissue samples, all of that stuff, and I found all these critters here, which is really pretty cool. Really fun part of the job, I would say, although they're my enemies. So this just speaks to essentially capability. A good indoor landscape firm will have in-house capabilities. There'll be a license to treat for pests inside. It is its own certification for pesticide application. Here's it sort of during its recovery phase. It maybe looks a little less good than it does on the right now because I'm going through another battle, but it just speaks to making sure that you are. And the other thing here is that these trees, these are known as black olives, but they're not related to olives at all. It's just, I don't know what it is, but it's, people think they are. Buceta buceris, they drop a lot of leaves, and they have a lot of issues. So you have to constantly shut down the lobby, shake them all down. And I'm not sure that that's what the operations team or the building might want. They might have considered something else if that had been, in the front of their mind. And now the last area we'll talk about, and the last check on our handy checklist that I have in front is renewal. A fact, indoor landscapes almost always require renewal that can be planned for in advance. And then this is, so we're going to go back to that wonderful Sky Atrium for a moment. So those trees were planted 7, 8, 9 stories up. The building was constructed around them. So in case of renewal, if something happened to the trees, deconstruct the building, I doubt it, But again, another wonderful example of this is actually Mount Sinai, the Guggenheim Pavilion in Yorkville. These trees were planted in the 90s, so our industry really came into full force around the 70s. So at that point, they didn't really know how long a ficus tree might last inside and then how long it would last in this condition or that condition or the other. But these are, now 30 or so years old. This is, kind of typical for an atrium inside that has 30-year-old trees. So it's probably time potentially to renew them. They've lost a lot of their vigor. But to do that, again, the building was built around them. So, replacing them would look something like that in the middle. And maybe another example, this is their downstairs, the original plantings. A steam pipe exploded, and so, they're the trees when that happened. And this isn't the best picture I find. They actually look a little nicer now. But again, you're replanting and renewing with rather small specimens comparatively to, what you started. And really the impact and the intention is lost. Our final slide on renewal here is this beautiful atrium in New Jersey. It's wonderfully designed, and the landscape is gorgeous. But another thought of renewal is the soil. Behind the scenes, you have a lot, when I was asked to consult recently, here have a lot of issues going on with soil degradation. And this, I keep saying soil even though it's soil-less. Indoors, you don't really use soil. Healthier indoor medium is almost all organic content currently, although we're looking at other types of soils, biochars and such. But it requires renewal on somewhat of a regular basis. So had the renewal process been considered early on, all of these stages would have been set for, the vision to continue, the landscape to have been protected. So just a quick going back over, and then I'll conclude. Sourcing, almost anything is possible. There are some wild, awesome plants out there. This is what keeps me going. All the experimentation. You can kind of almost do anything if you have the right timeline and allow that expectation onto, and bring somebody in that can source for you early. Environment, this restaurant wanted these, amazing plants inside, but to do that, they had to build an environment. So they're in terrariums. So you could consider, what is good for people isn't necessarily all good for plants. Another controlled environment, sure, go right ahead. Put, any type of tree that you want inside, but consider the environment it will require. There, I love that. It's actually like Hobry and Bryan moss that's misted every hour, and it's a good, I'm not a big fan of all that faux moss going around, or dyed, preserved formaldehyde moss, but good team, good horticulturalist, sort of anything's possible. You can do something whimsical, or, they'll be able to guide you to your vision. And then renewal. The winter garden, there's some of these trees out there to the right in California. They could live 150 years inside. They're about 10 years or so. They're on a plan. It's a plan that we came up with the New York Botanic Garden and the client. But because they expect it and know it, we have that 2 years now. We can go in there, efficiently replace them, and then that landscape, as it was intended, can remain as intended. So final slide is on teamwork. So this is where, everybody works together wonderfully. So at this project, the Lowline, worked with some firms here, worked with DBI, Matthews Nielsen, Arup, and Rad Studios. They brought us in very, very early, and actually in the very beginning. And originally they were going to get all these, the idea here is that they were going to bring light, or could bring light, down through long distances and illuminate plantings. The actual project was intended to be at the Delancey Street, the subway station. There's an abandoned trolley there. Bureaucracy in the city is, I think, what held it up, but this was the proof of concept in a blacked out greenhouse. So yes, they were able to bring light down, but they weren't able to acquire all of the mirrors and things to capture. So it was only just one small area where they were able to do it. So because we were there from the beginning, we were able to reevaluate, take the appropriate environmental measurements, the appropriate light readings, plan ahead for those constraints, and really work together, all parties, to make sure that we were able to help achieve the vision of the visionaries there. And so because we were multidisciplinary and involved in the beginning, it was great success, 100,000 people in about a year and a half. And that is it for me. Thank you very much. Yes.
We have time for a few questions, if anybody wants to do it. I would like to say that
Yes.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
So you mentioned soils briefly.
Yes.
And I find that when soils settle like that, there's a lot of compost or peat. So hopefully more compost than
Sure.
But could you go into the texture and what the soils look like for various different classes you talked about? Like, so there are perennials and herbaceous plants and woodies and also palms. So,
Sure, yeah.
Are the soils different for those things?
Not really. There's not enough effort so one of the things I love and also don't love about indoor landscaping is there's not a lot of data out there. There's not a public data. There's not a lot of research being done. I would love to open up a giant lab and do all sorts of testing, but it's not necessarily where the money is, so, or for other reasons. So a lot of the original indoor landscapes, well, there's different mixes that are recommended by different architects or different horticulturalists. There's mixes that were developed with proprietary mixes that I don't know the exact proportions of. But generally, the first consideration is the weight of the soil. So a lot of times you don't have a heavy soil. The second is how fluid works in a container versus in the earth. So it doesn't work the same way. We look for very light aerated soil. Like PD mixtures and core mixtures are developed for growers to grow new plants. They're ideal for that. It works wonderfully in the containers themselves. So they've taken that mixture and it's been utilized indoors. And we found that it has good enough aeration, has good enough drainage, but the problem is that it does kind of decompose. So if you go to an atrium that's 5-6 years old, you'll find a very dusty, kind of hydrophobic mix. So I'm currently looking at the composition. I'm having some of those mixes tested from different atriums around the country and different older plantscapes. And we're working to sort of develop a better system. There's some interest and trials being done on green roof mixes that are more, it's more like rocky or like volcanic stones. Yeah, and so I think there should be more testing done. It's a hard field to do all that without necessarily, when you're like one person in a firm, like it's just I think there needs to be more research done. And I mean, I'd love to talk to you more about soils and stuff, because I talked to professor at Cornell, and we're going on and on about soil, but we're talking different things, and his or her understanding or their understanding is different. So renewal is part of it for now. I think there's some really good prospect in some of the lightweight green roof mixes, some biochars, and other types of rocky mixes. We also find medium-wise in green walls. Sometimes it's just a foam. It's hydrocultures. So a lot of green walls today are actually just purely hydroponic. So there's no soil medium, So hopefully that answers your question a little bit. More needs to be done. Anybody else? Oh, hi, Nina. How are you?
I was just going to ask about hydroponics, but anyway, but my other question was, and I'm sorry I missed the beginning, so I hope this isn't redundant, but is there money in improvement in air quality, and did you talk about improvement?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I don't have all day on that one. I did quite a bit of research on the air quality. I will leave you with this. In a maybe if you were sitting in that office over there, maybe. But in a practical sense, plants won't clean your air. They're not magic, okay? A plant in the corner over there isn't going to take formaldehyde and VOCs and everything out of your air. There's more airflow going in and out of this space than the plant can keep up with, especially if the plant is barely functioning because it's not getting enough light. So it's barely going through its biological processes. Plants can be stress-inducing when they're yellowing and such too, So I take a lot of issue with a lot of the stuff that's online. I mean, I get myself riled up when I see the 10 best plants to glow in the dark and yada, yada. I do it to myself, I know. But there is some interesting stuff going on with larger hydroponic green walls, but a carbon filter may be more efficient than them. But in microbes, okay, and I don't know if I'm out of time, but microbials is very interesting because they are finding that, because we evolved with plants, they're finding that, like kids who play in the forest have a better microbiome, and they're finding that the plants do have a microbiome. They're finding that there is fungi and bacteria that does get in an indoor environment when they test it, and it's not bad. And so can that improve our health, and can it actually, there's some people that claim, we should have plants in hospitals because maybe it would balance out some of the bad bacteria. We're far away from that. But there's some very promising, very interesting studies in that realm. So if I was going to look anywhere, that's where I would look. I mean, there's not a lack of oxygen. So it's like one of these studies where you're like, okay, The biodomes or those experimentations did fail, oxygen-wise. I think it had to actually do with the concrete they were using inside, but do they produce oxygen? Yes. Do they produce carbon dioxide? Yes, at other times. But it kind of comes down to just the lack of, there being a lack of oxygen in the atmosphere. So, but yeah, they produce oxygen, but yeah. Thank you. I love those questions. Those are the best. Yes.
Do you, for the shaker, the black locust that you had, what was the light level you had? What was the length of light you had during the year?
Are you talking about the sky atrium, the black olive ones?
Right.
Yeah. They require very high light. We don't like to use them in most indoor environments, even though they're becoming super popular. They're like in every architectural magazine, like Vicus Lyrades used to be. So it's kind of a bummer because there's going to be a lot dying soon. But very high light. I can get you the specifications if you want. When you talk about intensity, most of the time in the old school method was just talk about foot candles in horticulture, which is really rather bizarre for everybody else. How many feet can you see with a candle in front of you? But when we talk about just intensity, you're talking about 500, 600 foot candles, which is a lot. But when you talk about quality, sometimes you can get away. If you have light, most architectural lighting is high in the reds, and I can let Arab speak to that, but it's not actually, light is food for plants and but at certain spectrums. So if it's really inefficient light, and in that atrium, it's not getting quite as much light as they might have thought. And the lights that they had, they can't replace because they can't, another design flaw, they can't bring it down. So like, I don't know, it gets very bare in the winter, and then the black olive comes back really nicely. So, but highlight, definitely highlight. So, yes, anybody? Sure.
So I wanted to ask about the trees. I have a couple of questions. Maybe this is like a three-part question. So the trees that went into the winter garden, the palm trees, I noticed the root balls are very small, and I know you were talking about establishing them for interior environment. But I was just wondering what their typical root ball requirement is. How do they get anchored in the winter garden? What's the soil volume requirement? How is that all technically designed for irrigation and soil replenishment? And then likewise, another picture you had of trees. Sorry, I just like.
That's cool. No, go for it.
There's another picture of trees where they also look like they were at plane, not in boxes. And so,
Okay.
how we do this in the exterior, like on green roofs or sidewalks, but you're working in interiors where the loading requirements may be much different because it's not on a roof.
Yeah.
It's a different engineered design. And so how are you figuring all of that out? So that's it. That's my whole thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a lot. I can't answer all of that. But that's also why I have my little niche, and you guys have yours, and structural engineers, have theirs as well. So it's about teamwork there. As far as the palms, though, they have incredibly aggressive fibrous roots, and they're really built to withstand hurricanes and wind. So they root in fairly shallow, and just kind of all these little tendrils and fibers hold them from falling over.
Is it like a clumping bamboo? More like a grass?
It's not like a rhizome. It's more like a grass. Yes. So it's more like a grass. So the requirements suggested by my colleagues that are in University of Florida and palm suggestions, you need about a 3-foot by 3-foot chunk of it to dig it up. So they dig these things up pretty without that much going on. And I would say new roots start coming in probably in the first couple of weeks, actually. So by the time they go in, I can't answer all of it about anchoring, but as far as the soil, they are placed on blocks. Essentially, there's giant pits underneath there, and they're placed on blocks because the soil will start to, sink. And there, we haven't had as much soil replenishment issues, but they are changed every, so often, every 10 years or so. Irrigation, a lot of irrigation. One of the issues with the very first installation before we got brought in there was that I don't know, they had sprinklers under there. I don't know why. They had rotating sprinklers, but they weren't getting enough water, and so they just weren't getting, it was causing failure. So I know that's not really everything you were asking, but that's kind of, as a horticulturist, that's the best I can kind of say for you. Sorry. Yes, thanks.
So as a horticulturalist, what do you think of the very old, many centuries ago, concept of what used to be called the orangerie and maybe winter garden, where trees such as oranges and citruses and other plants were set up on wheels,
Yes,
carts,
yes.
and they spent the months where the temperature went below freezing
Yes.
indoors and was a winter garden where it was fantastic. And then they were rolled outside, within its temperatures became safe for the summer.
Yeah.
As a way to keep these poor plants alive a little longer.
Sure. Yeah. I studied at the Royal Horticultural Society for a bit, based in the UK, and so we dealt with a little bit more of that type of historic kind of gardening there. I think they're wonderful. I mean, quite frankly, but what is different here is a lot of it's just the intersection of people and plants. So where we can coexist together. I find that I just had a request. The CEO of a building, they must have a key lime tree inside. They're not willing to budge on the light on it. But even that, going back to the indoor and the data that's indoors, we don't have enough data to actually tell you 100% this is how much light you need for this agricultural crop that grows in, south of Florida or Mexico, what you would need inside, because it's not really worth even gathering the data on. So I much prefer that to trying to put one in an office. I find that a lot of times there's been a lot of research, particularly in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, on what plants will work. I think some of that's coming back, but some of those oranges and stuff, we do a little of that also here. I love the concept. I don't know what else to say really except for that. It's super cool. I wish we were more. I wish our culture was more into gardening sometimes. Not to say it's not, but anyhow. All right. Thank you. I appreciate the question.
Okay. It's with this? Okay, great. All right, hi. My name is Zena Pitcanis. I'm not a landscape architect, so thank you for letting me in the door here. And I'm going to be talking today. I'm a daylight and electric designer at Arup. So I'm going to be talking today about 550 Madison. A lot of my collaborators on this project are presenters and also in the room, Julian and Annette from Siteworks and Darlene at Snowhetta. So this is on Madison Avenue between 55th and 56th Street. Again, the architect and landscape architect was Snowhetta. Siteworks was the executive landscape architect, and the horticulturist was Fido. I worked on this with my colleague Matt Franks at Arup, and previously Star Davis and Yulia De La Calle. So it's a postmodern skyline adorner, originally designed by Philip Johnson in 1984. This is technically an exterior landscape that I'm going to be discussing today, but in a lot of ways we treated it like an interior landscape. And it does include supplementary electric lighting, which is a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today. So I hope you'll forgive that exterior element. It also, though, has a very interesting relationship, the building, to a sort of exterior-interior continuum as the building has transformed since it was originally built in 1984. which I'll talk about in a second. But again, talking about the exterior features of the building, there's plenty to talk about in the interior, but focusing on the exterior, one of the most iconic, oh, I see, that's showing my next. I've been talking as if I'm one slide ahead. So one of the most iconic parts of the building is this iconic Chippendale top that you can see around New York City, and then also the extremely monumental proportions of the arch and the arcade at the building base. When the building was originally constructed in 1984, almost all of the floor plate at the ground was exterior. It was a very generous arcade that wrapped this little nugget of an interior lobby, and that allowed for a greater or a lesser setback by having all that exterior space and a larger floor plate. It also included this exterior passageway going between 55th and 56th Streets. In 1992, when the building became the Sony Tower, a lot of the arcade was closed off to become interior retail space, and that passageway was also enclosed, although still public space. And then it opened just in 2022 in the fall. The snow-headed design for ASLA-NY reopened a lot of that enclosed space to the exterior. So you can see some of these graphics will be very familiar to the snow-headed team. The public exterior space, this new 2022 design gave a lot of the floor plate back to the exterior and improved in a lot of ways. That arcade was like quite dark and cavernous, and this new design is much more light and airy than the original 1984 design. So we do have supplemental electric light to support the plant life on this building, but that actually wasn't part of the initial design. It was sort of later in DD when that became a part of the conversation. So the grow light had to sort of integrate into a full design that was basically realized at that point. So I want to talk about the lighting concepts of this space so that we can kind of understand what informed the criteria that we needed to design the plant lighting eventually. Some of the architectural concepts that we always first want to support. The original building design by Philip Johnson has a repeating motif of this round geometry as a circle, which informed a lot of the garden design, which included these sort of exterior defined rooms that the visitors to the park can move through and discover. There's also this tiered garden, seating, amenities, there's food kiosks, there's a public restroom, which I think is a really handy tip if you're in Midtown Manhattan. So in order to support these architectural concepts with lighting, we first sort of used light to carve out the postmodern geometric volumes, reinforcing those forms that are original to the architecture, and attempted to sort of emphasize that extremely monumental scale that you can't really understand until you're standing within it. We wanted to reinforce those motifs of those repeating geometries, and then also demonstrate the relationship of the exterior to the lobby, which is almost like the arch is extruded into the space. So you're getting a sort of procession, a sample of that interior space that you'll be experiencing. As this is sort of a case study, a deep dive, some of that carving out of these big stone structures was quite difficult and technical to achieve. This, for example, this sort of shorter but wider geometry is extremely difficult to light with just two lights. It's, I think, a little bit more than 20 feet across. So the way that we achieved that is by customizing these light fixtures that had two double adjustable optics that could, adjust independently. and they were sort of perpendicular blades that could move independently, one to scrape up the vertical surface and one to stretch along the horizontal surface, and together they created this really nice uniform application of light on these stone structures. And then moving up to the crown of the building, pictured on the left is the original non-functioning lights. They haven't functioned for a long time, but they did give us a sort of hint as to what the original intent of the lighting design was intended for the crown. So you can kind of suss out that there was a soft glow on the interior cylinder, and then where they're clustered, more of like a highlight on that exterior stone rim. So these are images from our focus session, again, giving you a sense of the scale of that crown, and you can see the outer rim of the cylinder highlighted by those clusters of lights. All of these just sort of the original intent, but updated with modern LED technology. And then on the ground, and I hope that my collaborators can forgive that these pictures were taken in January, so the planting is not at its best. So our intent down here was to contrast the sort of wildness of the planting with the clean lines of the architecture, to define those exterior rooms that are so important to the design of the floor plan, and to mark these moments for gathering. We also, from the view from the interior, created this sort of foreground and background, adding this vertical illuminance to what is normally a water feature. And then from the canopy, ambient light coming from the canopy, just very low level, like 2 to 5 foot candles, which at night is ample. And then we matched the color temperature from the interior to the exterior, so it just felt like an extension of that interior space. So that gets us, to the end of DD, middle of DD. We're, just moving towards construction documents. At that point is when the planting design became much more specific. And I'm just going to flip through some of this NOHEDA FIDO visualizations that show the lushness of the planting that was planned. What was intended, as I understand it, the plants that are selected were the sort of hardiest, also flowering plants for plants that would thrive in shade. So the question was raised, if the daylight that was available in this garden that is surrounded by skyscrapers, with a canopy that's covered by glass, but still that's reducing the amount of light that's available to the plants, if the amount of daylight that was available could support the types of plants that we were planning for. So there's a number of rules of thumb. A lot of them we just went through. These are very sort of basic first steps when you're planning for planting light. But an area that is extremely understudied, we learned something about it a few minutes ago, is the quantity of light for ornamental plants. Like establishing what our criteria is for what is enough light was one of the hardest parts of this process. So we had some initial guidance from FIDO, which they were very clear that this was based on like their own field observations and measurements that they had taken. So very sort of rough guidelines, more of a jumping off point. They were taken around noon at a couple of times of year in the spring and the fall. And for the types of plants that we were planning for, the like baseline illuminance requirement that we were looking at was around 500-foot candles. 400-foot candles. So in order to reach that target, that's a combination of daylight, which is of course a variable metric, and electric light, which is fixed. And when I first made this slide, I made it a luminance target, but I think that's kind of misleading. I changed it to benchmark because I think target kind of implies that we're trying to just like hit this static 400-foot candles across the year, but those measurements were taken at a particular time of day, at a particular time of year. Daylight is variable. So really our question was like, can we like achieve that target of 400-foot candles? That schedule could be sort of worked out, but like, is this achievable given the amount of daylight we have, and then with a sort of reasonable electric light design as well? Some notes there. Yeah, of course.
I don't know if anybody else here knows what really a foot candle is. I think Andrew mentioned it.
Yeah.
Could you give us some idea of the light, or how much light is a foot candle, and how much light is 400 foot candles? 'Cause I know
Yeah.
it's like in the middle of the day. I
Of
just don't
course.
know what.
Yeah, I mean, a foot candle, I believe the term was from a stage, at the foot of the stage. In the olden days, there's lamps at your feet, foot candles. And I mean, when you're talking about like a metric of light, how bright is light, it's almost impossible to talk about because our eyes and our brains are constantly like adjusting for the amount of light. So 2-foot candles during the daytime, you would feel like you're plunged in darkness. But at night, like our target for this garden, in fact, the city wanted us to be at 5-foot candles, which we were like, are you kidding? It's gonna feel like you're in like on stage or something. Like that's really bright for the nighttime. But like you couldn't work in that in an office. No, not a dumb question at all. No, it's something we talk about all the time because your eye is constantly adjusting for it. And again, like 400-foot candles produced by electric light, I mean, which isn't what we achieved. It was a combination of electric light and it is really bright. But it's also, I mean, we're gonna go through some measurements of like what daytime is. So I think that will help. But ask it again at the end if it doesn't help. Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, and it's also like there's equivalent in lux. Some people are more familiar with lux. Lux is essentially just 10 times a foot candle. So 1-foot candle is just about 10 lux. I don't know if that helps, but. We're starting our query with how much daylight is available in the space. So looking first at just like sun access. When is the sun able to sort of plunge down into the depths of this forest of skyscrapers and actually access the garden itself? So this is like kind of another way to look at that slide that we were just looking at. On the left is the sun path chart of New York City, and on the right is that superimposed over the sky dome. So if you look at the figure 8s on the sun path chart, you can also see it kind of peeking out over here. That's like an hour of a day across the year. So the red being the summer, the blue being the winter, and the green being either of the equinoxes. So you can see when you look up, like if you can see the color, that's when you would be able to see the sun if you were standing in the garden. So because you can only see one of those figure 8s, that's like a couple hours in the summer, maybe an hour in the equinoxes, and no direct sun access in the winter. But that, of course, doesn't account for weather. That just shows like when are all the possible times that direct sun could reach the garden. In the summer, for example, which is when we would get the most direct light to the space, maybe 40% of the time, 30% of the time, it would be cloudy. And then, of course, the amount of daylight in a space is variable across the year. So when we're not getting the direct sun in the winter, that's when we have less illuminance available overall. So one advantage that we had that we don't always have, of course, is that this building was constructed. So we could go there and take some measurements. And at that point, the annex still existed. So I was able to climb up on top of the annex, which was basically like standing on top of our canopy that would be constructed eventually, and take, I went one day for 1 hour. It's just kind of like to get an idea. But I took measurements both on the annex roof and on the building roof. And the reason we did that was so that we could get a sort of rough, what we would call maybe a daylight factor, which that term is usually used to understand if on an overcast day you have the amount of daylight like measured outside the building. If you take a measurement inside of the building, like what percentage of light are you getting on the inside the space? Is it 1%? Is it 2%? just to give a sort of rough idea, and there are also like lead requirements based on that. So that's normally when we do daylight factor calculations. But we did this to understand, like, okay, well, if we're getting 1,200 foot candles at the top of the building, what can we kind of expect to get down at the top of the canopy? And then, you know, understanding the specification of the glass, like how much, what percentage of that would be going through the canopy and reaching the planting below. But as you can see, like, I mean, this was December when we're not getting direct light. While I was there, the weather kind of was doing a lot of things. It was mostly clear for a bit, and then it became overcast, and maybe counterintuitively, there was more daylight when it was overcast, which is mostly just because you've got this like big cloudy diffuser, so you're getting contribution from like all over the sky dome. So these measurements we found to be pretty encouraging. Looking at it another way, I mean, really our intent at this point was to examine the data that we had available to us from as many vantages as possible, so that we could have a conversation between Siteworks, Noheda, Fido, and us to decide, like, what are we comfortable with in terms of light. So this is showing spatially for any point throughout the entire garden, what percent of daylight hours, hours where the sun is out, is the illuminance exceeding any of the thresholds. So you can see almost all the time, all daylight hours, we have more than 50-foot candles. But when you come over to our threshold, our target, not as much, more like, I mean, we're in the blue 20 to 40 range. This is basically that same information in a different format with just 4 different points. So you can say, okay, 100% of the time over there on the y-axis, we're exceeding 0-foot candles. That makes sense. But over on our threshold, we're in the 20 to 30% range. But when we were thinking about what our threshold actually is, it's a measurement at noon. 8 a.m. would be darker than noon, so we looked at it again with just the noon hours. So each of these is 1 noon. There's 365 points for each point. And I think the blue and the gray are where more of the lusher planting are, and we're more in like the 50 to 60% range. Again, like pretty encouraging. This same data just like mapped out over the year. This is all the noons across the year, and the y-axis is foot candles. So in the summer, we're exceeding 400-foot candles quite a bit. Less so in the spring and the fall when we might be like reaching our flowering areas. So kind of in a theoretical schedule way, as we're starting to like tease out what the actual design would be, maybe the supplemental electric light could just be in the spring and in the fall. And if we're achieving approximately 300-foot candles-ish around the middle of the day, maybe our electric light target is 100-foot candles. So we are then trying to understand, like, is 100-foot candles possible? That is like a lot of light to achieve from a 70-foot canopy with the like architectural ambitions. Like, we're not trying to create like a greenhouse or a farm. Like, this has to fit into the context of a public garden. So within like reasonable quantities, reasonable outputs, fixtures that like appear integrated into the architectural language of the canopy, is it possible to achieve 100-foot candles? But like really what we're trying to do at this point is like maximize, like what really can we get to in a reasonable fashion? Oh, I skipped ahead. So just quickly, like again, this is a tiered planting plan. So this just shows where we kind of placed our calculation planes. They're at different areas. It's gonna be easier to achieve higher illuminance at 40 feet than it is at 10 feet. And this is our basis of design. This is what we had previously had in our documentation. It's a 5-ish inch fixture. The geometry of it is, very domed and circular. It fits into the architectural language. And our target at that time was 5-foot candles, but only over the pedestrian areas, not on the top part of the plan where the most of the planting is and where people can't circulate. So you can see here we're achieving about like 5 to 7 foot candles with our basis of design fixtures, and we don't currently have any fixtures placed over the planting. I'm gonna just kind of skip ahead. We tried a bunch of things. There were a lot of different ideas. We looked at a lot of different fixtures. I'm gonna skip ahead to what we ended up with. So this fixture here, it's about 3 or 4 times the size of the original fixture, but still fits within, I think, the architectural language of the fixture. We had to do a number of modifications to really milk it for all of the output that we could get from it, which I'll talk about in a moment. So this is the results with all the modifications, with this greater fixture, and with what we ended up doing, which is a 1-to-1 fixture replacement over the pedestrian areas, and then extending that layout over the planting. And you can see, of course, in the higher areas, the 40-foot up, we're achieving and exceeding our goal, and achieving it in the lower areas. And just for a little context, these are renderings from Snøhetta, just to understand the visual difference between the old fixture and the new fixture. This is the original 5-inch fixture, which almost you need that little glare spot to see them. And they are bigger, but again, this is quite high up. So I think that they ended up sort of fitting into that language quite well. So there were a number of things we did to increase the output of these fixtures. One, we got pretty lucky because again, the canopy is so high up. We're using a spot lens. That was what we had planned on. It's a 15-degree beam, which is very tight. And that just happens to be the native optic of the LEDs without any lensing. So the lens that is in that fixture is merely a softening lens. It's not spreading the lens or tightening the lens in any, tightening the beam in any way. It's just creating a nice soft edge. So in the areas over the planting, we had them just take that out. So we're just having the native optic of the fixture. We left it in over the pedestrian areas because, over the planting, you have texture and shape and all this stuff going on. There's no way that you would be able to pick up on any sort of hard edge, but over the pavement, you would definitely be more sensitive to that uniformity. So we got 15 to 30% additional output from the fixture by removing the lens. We, matched the finish to the canopy. And then I think this is one of the more interesting parts. We had them create this sort of custom tunability of the fixtures where 25% of the fixture diodes were 3000K and 75% of them were 4000K. So you can kind of see, I hope, that in the 4000K in the middle, it's almost like an upside down U. And then in the 3000K, it's just, that's what the 4000K is hugging. And the reason we did this is because we still wanted the 3000K to blend with the interior lighting design. This provides just the evening light for pedestrian areas. It's just 2 to 5 foot candles, and it creates that continuity. This is more of the hospitality setting. And then the 4000K during the day, again, is 75% of the diodes. It is what's supplementing the plants. The cooler color temperature blends better with daylight, and it contains more of the blue and red wavelengths that are more efficient for plant lighting. And I'll go into the spectrum in a second, but this is the schedule that we're working with, at least initially. We have our grow lighting setting during the day, which actually, it's actually all on. It's 3000K and 4000K at full we have it turn on 30 minutes after sunrise, and then turn on 30 minutes after sunrise and turn off 30 minutes before sunrise, so that that transition is always happening when it's well lit and less noticeable. And then in the evenings, it's just the 3000K and the aesthetic lighting, and then the aesthetic lighting turns off when the garden closes and it's more in the like security mode. So again, the spectral distribution of the 4000K is more efficient for the plant lights. These are, of course, like these are not horticultural lights. These are architectural lights, but the blues and the reds are what the plants like better. So the 4000K, you can see the peaks in those areas. In addition, the 4000K is just more efficient. Like you can see how the wavelengths are higher just in general. We're getting more punch out of this light at 4000K than we are at 3000K, and that's just like across the board. That will generally be the case with all fixtures. And just as a comparison, this is like a horticultural light where they basically have taken all the green out of it. It's just the red and the blue. Green is reflected by plants, which is what gives it its nice green color. Obviously, this is not workable for a public garden, but just to show like what is like the most efficient as a comparison. And then one thing that ended up being like very important to the design and something that we really had to fight for with the various contractors is that normally when you have color tunable fixtures that change between color temperatures, the color temperatures just dim. So even if we were at like our all the way 4000K state, the 3000K would be like on just a little bit. Like they can't be totally switched on and off independently, just dimmed. For this, like it was absolutely essential to the design that each of the color temperature was able to like basically operate fully independently. They can dim totally, but they can also be switched off. And that was because in the nighttime setting, when we're again trying to achieve 2-foot candles, like 9% of the 4000K fixtures would have just like wiped everything else out, would have been very apparent, and that's really what we could dim to before the fixtures turned off. So we had like 2 hots, 2 neutrals, like it was, they were basically like 2 fixtures in one. The downside of that is that control and power cabling couldn't like fit through the knuckle, which is how it normally would work. Like you can see this cable like snaking out the side. Normally that would go through the attachment point. That wasn't possible here, but you can see up there like the cable snaking out. It's again like very high up and on top of the fixtures, so it's totally not noticeable. And then you can see there, I mean this is our marked up submittal that I have here on the left. Just the 3000K versus the 4000K, like how those diodes are fitting together. So our finishing touches in commissioning to make the system sort of sing. One thing that we did, this was a diagram that we provided to the contractor. These are tight beamed fixtures, so we wanted to make sure that the hungriest and neediest plants were receiving as much light as possible. So this is just showing which fixtures we wanted to be aimed at specific plants, and then also the fixtures are quite close to the wall, so we just had them tip them off so that there's no scallops on the party wall. One thing that we were all worried about, the architecture team, us as well, was important to the design aesthetically was a sort of like tin soldier. We wanted the fixtures to all appear to be straight down, even if they were aimed at a plant. Again, though, with what ended up happening was, again, the canopy is so high up that like if you're trying to aim it, you just have to kind of, and it was definitely not noticeable, even the ones that were like the most aimed off. And I mean, this is again the pre-focus versus the post-focus. The biggest noticeable thing is you can see the scallops on the wall over there versus after they were refocused and creating a nicer appearance. This maybe will help your question a little bit, Al. This was during commissioning. I just think this is an interesting photo showing the grow lights on at night. And especially when they were all on, it was like prison yard bright. Like it was like very intense. And it's not common to have that kind of like color discernment at night. And like from that angle, I found it to be very eerie when the grow lights were on at night. And then one additional very last minute thing that we ended up doing, this was taken, I guess, the night before the ribbon cutting when we were doing our final touches on the focus. The pine conifer trees were not doing very well. They had just been moved. You guys know better than me about the stress that that puts on a plant, but they were not doing super well. There were some brown parts to the conifers. Our original design had just been to sort of uplight all the trees in the same way, but what we ended up doing to just make sure that those conifers looked as good as possible is refocusing the lights so that they were pointed at the wall, creating this like silhouette image. It also put this like beautiful shadowy, in the wind it would rustle and create this movement on the back wall, and also just like created these like layers to the planting, like highlighting the like foreground and the background. It looked really nice. We had specified actually for the uplights, which are stake mounted, for them to be mounted with 3 feet of slack buried next to them so that we could be flexible in case of something like this, which would have been awesome if the contractor had done that. So we did in some cases we were moving them closer to where the source of the power was, not always. In some cases it worked better than others, but I do think that overall the effect, even when the plants are healthy, I think it was a great improvement, and I'm so glad that we stumbled upon that at the last minute. And actually, as I came back down from the planting, it was pouring rain at this point. I was covered in mud and soaking wet. It was kind of embarrassing, but the architecture team, we kind of took a step back and looked at it, and we realized that it was so close to this like early sketchy design that we had done like way back in the beginning when we were just like throwing out ideas, and it created this like very beautiful shadowy backdrop that was very beautiful, and that's what I had to say. Yeah, I mean, they sometimes quite difficult. I mean, we have a situation right now where one of the fixtures still hasn't been refocused, or maybe it has at this point. It's been a couple months since I've talked to them about it, but they do need to get a lift in there, and they can get to almost all of them with the, I don't know the terminology, the lifts that like extend. Yeah, almost all of them. There are just a couple that they can't, because you can also go to 55th and 56th Street and access them that way.
I know the conifers, I'm sure a bunch got switched out. Do you know if that was lighting or the slope? Because there were really extreme slopes on that. Any idea?
There are definitely people in the room that are better equipped to answer that question than me.
And just if that was a lighting issue?
Yeah, I mean, the lighting at that point, I mean, they had just been installed at the point that I'm talking about, so the lighting is more of a long-term solution at that point. Like, it wouldn't have been able to have, it wouldn't have had time to have an effect on it at that point. But, yeah.
The answer is it's complicated. We're not allowed to talk.
Nursery stock is a huge problem. We could have nursery stock is a huge problem. We could have a whole discussion, but just about that for 5 hours.
It's complicated is the answer.
I'm just curious about how you deal with like night lighting that's required for security purposes and balancing out. Do you think that using the 3,000
I mean, the 3,000K during the day is only over the pedestrian areas. I mean, there are some trees in those areas, but the bulk of the planting is not in those areas that are under the 3,000K. But again, our target for that was 2-foot candles. Like the ratio of the light at that point, like it's so minuscule that I don't expect that.
So at night, you don't think that that's a problem at all?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
How did you collect your data on the baseline foot candle measurements?
Sorry, I didn't.
How did you collect your data for the baseline foot candle measurements that you presented towards the meeting?
Of like the predictive analysis?
Yeah.
I mean, that's using Radian software and like weather data from like typical years, like TMY3 data that has like typical weather conditions and illuminance measurements.
Did you use like a light meter or go out to the site to kind of record baseline levels?
We only used a light meter for the slide where I was like on the roof and on the annex.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we used like typical data collected at like weather stations. Yeah.
Do you have any plans to evaluate the success of this moving forward, or I don't know whether you're turning off a certain section or not? There's such little data on this out there right now.
Totally.
I'm curious if there's any discussions or opportunities on how to fold that into the future.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to. Like I said, like everybody has said, there is not a lot of data on this. I mean, you come up against, like, there's probably very little client interest in that. And we don't have a, like, contract with them continuing. But, like, you know, it is just in our backyard. So